Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the show. And as you can tell, today we are joined by an incredibly special guest. You may know him best as Leatherface in the 2022 Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Today we are joined by Mark Burnham. Mark, how are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you. Happy to be here.
It's such a privilege to get to speak to you. Pretty much since the movie was released, I've desperately wanted to talk to you about this movie, so it's awesome to finally get that opportunity.
Yeah, I'm sorry it took so long to make it happen.
No, it's no problem. These things happen. Um, so obviously, I know everyone listening to this is going to be very desperate to hear about the makings of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Um, but first, I'd really kind of like some of the audience to get to know you kind of before the role.
hmm
So I kind of want to start first is how did you first get into acting?
Well, I fell into it really, and so I was not a great student. I was in high school here in this country. I passed with C's and D's, which is barely, and I was happy to have that, and be free of it. Um, and then I kicked around. I was working. I was just working and partying, just kind of like wasting away for the few years. And then in my early 20s, I started thinking about, you know, I I worked for a big corporation in this country just as a worker bee, and I started looking at the people that it's a giant facility. And I started looking at some of the people that were walking around and had been there for 30, 40 years. And I was like, oh my God, I can't even. I don't even want to be that person. So, but I was not a great student. I had limited options. But my stepbrother at the time was here in Hollywood trying to make his way in the stunt community, doing as a stunt performer. So I lived in Phoenix at the time, near Phoenix, and I drove here and visited here. I think I flew actually, now that I mention it. But anyway, whatever. I visited him for a week and kind of hung out with him and his friends here in Hollywood, who were all his friends are all stunt people. And at the end of the week, I went home. I went back to Arizona, and I was uh, said to myself, like, okay, so I know for sure I don't want to jump off buildings and stuff like that, but maybe I should find out what it means to be an actor. And so I went to the local community college and I started studying. And pretty much from that point on, I never stopped studying acting for many years. And of course, I got straight A's because I was motivated and I was interested and I wanted to do the work, and I was not, a great actor, but I wanted to be better all the time. And yeah, then I moved here a couple of years later and went to school at two other schools for 3 or 4 more years. And then I just got out and I hit the pavement, and I got a few lucky breaks here and there. A schoolmate of mine was dating an agent, a commercial agent at a big, good, reputable commercial agency. And so that person took me on and started sending me out to auditions 3 to 5 times a week.
Awesome.
And yeah, yeah. So that's how I started doing it. And acting school is great, it's necessary. You have to do it. But acting school taught me everything about what to do after you get a job and absolutely nothing about how to get a job. So that all that I learned on my own, and it took years to do.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. It's a funny thing actually, because every time I get to speak to actors, it's always funny how when it comes to the art itself and working on a set, that's kind of the bread and butter of what they've been studying. But the biggest struggle I always hear at the start is the audition process and the second auditions. Um,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
do you kind of remember, obviously, I suppose from then even to now, how different the audition process is? Have you had to kind of change your mentality on like auditions as the kind of years have gone on?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So I don't know how much your listeners or your followers know about this, but in 2015, the way actors get jobs in this country, I can only speak of, but I assume it's everywhere, is there are no more in-person meetings for the worker bee normal actors. I'm sure the, top tier A-list people, they still get to go meet somebody in person. But for the day-to-day working dude, there's no more in-person meetings. It's all, I have to put myself on tape and send it in, and then whoever looks at it and decides if it warrants another meeting or whatever. And so, but in those days, like that's why I say I got lucky with that agent, because he was a top tier agent for commercials. And so right away, he started sending me out 3 to 5 times a week on national legitimate commercial campaigns. And I did about, I don't know, 2 years or more before I got a job, which sounds like horrible, but it's really good because what that taught me to do was cold read. And so I'm a pretty badass cold reader now. I audition really well in the room. I can, I do that really well. And but that being said, not to transition, I'm more than happy to speak about the past. But so in 2015, it changed from in-person meetings to self-tapes only. I mean, thereabouts 2015, 2016. And before that, I had a great reputation in the casting community. Like they would call me in. I mean, I must have read 35, 40 times for a show in this country called Malcolm in the Middle, which was Bryan Cranston. And he was not a producer, but he was a one of the stars of that movie. And so I had a really good reputation. I was always, among the top of the people that they wanted to see. And that's across all different kinds of shows. David E. Kelly show, same thing. I had, 25 meetings for any project that David E. Kelly went on, just for, what they call co-star guest star roles, smaller parts. Um, but when it switched to self-tapes, all that went away. So from 2015 or 16, whenever it started self-tapes until Texas Chainsaw Massacre, do you know how many callbacks I had on any self-tape I sent in? Zero. None. No response, nothing. And so to go from that kind of like, kind of I wouldn't say it was elite status, but it's like, one of the good people that they call in regularly, to go from that to nothing was a very serious thing that I had to challenge, that I had to overcome. So yeah,
Wow. Thank you for sharing that, because I think that's something that not necessarily a lot of actors like to disclose, like the reality of the challenges of, processes being changed and how quickly as the industry, I suppose, evolves. I don't necessarily know if it's
yeah,
good or bad, how it evolves,
yeah.
like the reality and the changes. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, it really, in a sense of what it was all the no's that I heard those 2 years before I got a job in early on in my career. It's like it set me back into that
Yeah.
place. You know what I mean? It just took away any kind of reputation I had. And so it was very difficult to deal with. I would say it's still, there are people who have mastered the self tape. I have friends who do great self tapes and all that. I'm not saying I do poorly, but I am saying that it's much simpler for the person looking at the tape to say delete. You know what I mean? than it would be if I were in the room. Not that they would I'm just saying like they would have a better opportunity to see what I really do rather than just a camera um and me like reading lines. You know what I mean? It's not the same experience um on their side of the picture. Yeah.
Yeah, and also there's a I could definitely imagine there's a physical like a physical gut feeling you can have when you're watching somebody in the same room as opposed to there being a screen between you. Like
For
you're just
sure.
watching like almost a video as opposed to feeling that gut connection. That's another big part of it as well.
Another aspect that they just don't do anymore is the adjustment. So you could start the scene and read through it, and either the whoever the meeting was with, the casting director or the director or producer or whatever, would say, okay, that's great, Mark, but this time do it, whatever, like you're rushing to go to this grocery store, whatever, doesn't matter. They can adjust you. And quite often what they would do is uh, simply adjust you to see if you can make an adjustment, because a lot of people are great at something that's locked in, but when you say do it a little differently, they can't do it. But there is no adjustment now. It's just you know my um what's the word, my interpretation of their material, get it to where it's what I think is good, and then I send it in. And if they're like going, gee, that was okay, but I wish he had done it like he went to the grocery store. You know what I mean? Like there's no
Yeah.
opportunity for that change to be viewed.
Yeah, I didn't even
So
think of it that way. Yeah, that's crazy. Wow.
yeah,
Um, so when you first decided this is the industry you wanted to go in, or whether you
yeah.
were, studying or you were auditioning, was there ever like a particular role you wanted to try or a character or a franchise? Was there anything in particular you thought that would be like the goal to do?
Before I decided to study acting, before I did even acting 101 at community college, like in my later high school years, and then after high school, during that period where I said I was partying, I went to a lot of movies. So, and that was in the, I don't want to date myself, but whatever. That was in the mid 80s. So I saw a lot of movies like First Run, The Thing, Rambo, uh, a lot of kind of like, you know, normal Hollywood releases of that time, but not like, B grade. I would say B grade releases. Um, because they weren't, high dramas, and they weren't, they didn't have studio backing. So these were just like a bunch of action movies and horror movies that uh I really was like introduced to. And um I didn't even recognize as an interest. I just knew that I like going to movies. But what it kind of opened my mind to was the fact that you could get involved in a story, that the audience member could sit there and follow along with something that they were viewing. And in fact, be thinking like, wow, what would I do if I was Kurt Russell in the middle of the Antarctic and a giant dog head was going to eat, whatever. But like just that idea. Remember, I was not, one thing I didn't say about my pre acting life is I was incredibly shy. I never did well in sports. I was a big, skinny dude who was incredibly shy. So, um, to have these kind of imaginative revelations was kind of mind blowing to me. And then one of the first experiences I had in acting class was they did this monologue competition at the community college. And so I was on stage in front of a packed house, and I did this monologue, and I knew at that second that I had every person in that audience's attention in that same way. Like they were following along, they were seeing what I was talking and making their own, parallels to their own life. And so I know I've digressed from your original question, but it does relate because kind of the point of that whole long digression is that I didn't have one thing that I wanted to do or one actor that I followed. Of course, there's always De Niro and those people and, Pacino and stuff like that. But, really I was involved in the story and being able to grab that person metaphorically by the lapels and just make them uh, follow along with me on whatever my story was. And that's what really kind of turned me on about being an actor.
It's crazy because somebody again, I can feel like I was very similar. So certainly in my earlier years is that I used to be painfully shy. Like having just a conversation with people was almost unheard of. Like I would only speak to very old close friends and family. So I
Yeah.
kind of feel how I used to feel back then, and to think of standing in front of a crowd for like saying a monologue is genuinely one of the most petrifying things, even to this day, that I could imagine
I
doing.
mean,
So I can't
I
imagine how
was
you did
scared.
it.
I was scared too, man. You know what I mean? But you have some story to tell. Like
Yeah.
that particular experience, I was uh, performing a monologue from Sam Shepard's Fool for Love, where he's talking about walking across the field, the just freshly plowed field, and how his feet sink into the dirt and just that journey that he's on. And, it's nighttime, the stars are out, whatever, so there was a lot of rich imagery with which to um, convey the story. And that's the kind of key to what we're talking about here. Because once you have something to do, if you're a shy person or something like that, you can begin to break out because you have like I said, you have something to do. I wanted to tell that story to these people, and to do that I had to see the images of the things that I'm saying. And once you do that, any shyness goes out the window because your kind of your subconscious is distracted with telling the story. And if you do it that way, as the time goes on, you become less shy and less shy, and just begin to find your own voice.
Awesome. That's amazing. Um, so when you kind of, I would say, eventually started to break into the industry and you started to book, whether it was TV show appearances, commercials, like roles in movies, and um, when that kind of period started happening, do you have any particular standout moments or particular sets that you really enjoyed working on when you first sort of broke in?
Mm. Um, well, I'm a student of the filmmaking process, so like I recognized pretty early on with the difficulty that I had getting work, uh, that you know I wasn't going to be one of these actors who gets discovered and plucked out of the chorus line, and all of a sudden they're in giant studio movies. You know what I mean? Like that, my journey was going to be a journeyman's journey, a working actor kind of thing. Like, and any notoriety that I gained had to be sourced in the fact that I was a damn good actor, and I understood the filmmaking process. So once I started booking jobs, I never really hung out in the trailer or in the costume area or whatever. I was behind the, out of the way, not bothering anyone, but watching what was being done by every person on the set. And eventually that led to, you know, when there was a break or something, I would go up to certain people and just ask them about their job and this, that, and the other thing. And then out of that, I became kind of brave enough um, to be able to, in between takes, say to the different people, how did that look? Or was that good? Or do you need anything else from me? Or the director would give me notes and say, you know, don't look that way on that line, wait until, well, whatever it is. So I was always kind of searching and looking and hoping and trying to find the thing that was going to make me a better filmmaker. And you know, so that always isn't always like a positive thing, right? So on my I had this TV show that I did, pretty it was a very popular TV show at the time, and I had a tiny minuscule little part, but it was my basically my first TV job, and it was a what they call a procedural. It's a police drama, and I was in the interrogation room being interrogated by most of the regular cast members. And so we did it for a rehearsal once, and the director came up and adjusted me, and then he turned around and walked away. And each one of these people, these other actors who were, you know, they were all named people, like they were all, you know, big stars or whatever. And each one of them goes through and coaches me, not only directly opposite of what the director just said, but directly opposite of what each other just said. And I'm sitting there like I'm scared. Like on those first few jobs in TV, I mean, I can only assume other people had that fear. Like I'm just hoping not to get fired. Like as long as I can get through the day and like not be sent home, like it's a good day. So I was freaked out. And and these people like doing that to me really pissed me off, you know, because that's really not something that an actor should do to someone else, is tell them what to do or explain to them their part. Here, what you should do it this way. That's kind of like, shouldn't do that. And I felt like these guys being professional, they should have known that and
Yeah.
not done it. So I was really kind of pissed off. But here's the lesson. So the lesson is that uh, within reason, I should do whatever the fuck I want to do and forget about everybody else, whatever they want to do, unless it's the director or producer saying you have to do this. Then beyond that, it's my decision. And so that was the lesson coming out of that TV show. So it's not always a positive thing that shows you what you should do. You know what I mean? But I'm always looking for those kind of sorry about that. I'm always looking for those kind of experiences on any job that I'm, you know, do, whether it's Texas Chainsaw Massacre or, you know, one of those beginning jobs that I did. I did 42 takes on a commercial once, and that was a great lesson because, you know, whatever in the teens and 20s, you're thinking, oh my God, I'm fucking this up. I'm screwing all this up for all these people. But no, it has nothing to do with you, you know. This particular shot was involved a car hitting a mark and me walking across the street. I had to be in a certain place by the time the camera stops right there. So it was a lot of moving parts in this thing, and not everybody was on the same page. But that was a great lesson in just what's called matching, which is a concept in filmmaking where you do exactly what you just did. Unless somebody tells you to do something different, you have to do it exactly how you just did. Because sometimes they shoot the same thing from far away and it has to look the same, right? You can't do something outlandish that you didn't do in the master, because then they won't be able to use that cut in the edit. So you have to be able to perform and do everything that you just did. And I'm talking about vocal inflection, looks, breathing, whatever it is, it's got to be exactly the same. So, and that came into play on Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which I'm sure we'll get to.
I just feel like I feel like if I'm sitting here talking to you about your career, I feel like you've gone through almost every kind of scenario and situation that a lot of people kind of think and would dread. Like, I don't know how you managed to kind of like, I feel like you, although it could piss you off, like I can imagine you're still quite a cool, relaxed kind of person, or did you kind of feel sometimes you thought, I'm gonna do something that's gonna definitely cost me my job?
Well, it's different things now, right? So,
Yeah,
you know, like I'm not worried about anything I do in front of the camera. Maybe it's something I say to one of the producers or directors or actors that, somebody takes the wrong way. It's
yeah,
more a different sensibility kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like I have my working process pretty much down so that at least I can have the conversation to justify artistically anything that I choose to do while the camera's rolling. But if I bump somebody in the lunch line or call them an asshole or what I don't know what it is. Whatever it might be, those are the things that I kind of got to watch out for, you know, because
absolutely.
I kind of speak my mind and I mean I'm a pro. I pride myself on my professionalism, but that's kind of a double-edged sword too, because if somebody else isn't being professional, then what do I do? Do I say something or do I just shut up and try to get through the day? So it's those kind of things that I kind of am focused on now.
So I'm not going to leave the listeners or viewers waiting much longer. Um, you know,
No worry.
I have to talk to you obviously about Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Um,
Yeah.
as I kind of told you off camera, and this is no bias because you've joined us today. Not only did I truly love the movie and what they did with the movie, but I strongly feel, and I think if you read a lot of reviews, it's quite a unanimously agreed thing is that your performance as Leatherface is one of the standout, not just moments, but the standouts of the entire movie. So the work you did is truly incredible, and for the, I feel like I guess the pressure you may have had to play such
Hmm.
a probably the most iconic horror character of all time. How did
Yeah.
you cope with kind of that pressure of knowing I'm playing Leatherface in a Texas
Yeah.
Chainsaw Massacre movie?
Well, once I got over the kind of amazement that it was going to happen, um, and kind of started digging into the job, that I was told in pretty much straightforward terms that I was hired to play Gunnar Hansen as if he was doing the part now. So here is where that filmmaking concept of matching comes into play from what I was talking about a few minutes ago. Because now, not only do I have to match myself in every take, but formulating the character, I have to completely match someone else who is no longer alive and I can't talk to them. And I only have a couple of examples of their work from which to formulate my whole characterization. So, um, but like as a challenge, filmmaking wise, that's something that I can sink my teeth into. If I get, it's like a little tiny crack in the dam, right? Like I can get in there
Yeah.
and pull it apart and kind of formulate how I'm going to do this thing. And just to kind of expand on this a little bit more. So they hired me to play another actor playing the same character in a different story as if he were doing it now. So I have to study Gunner's movement patterns and then kind of fuzzy logic wise extrapolate those into my movement patterns and how it would look and be if it was Gunnar doing the stuff. And I feel like, you know, I mean, if you kind of said that to somebody before the job, I bet you would get no one to sign up. You know what I mean? They would be like, no way, I can't do it. I don't even know where to start. But if it comes in after, you're like, okay, I guess this is it. Let's go. And you just kind of formulate a way to make it happen. And I didn't know if I could do it. You know, I there were times when it well, I'm speaking early on in the filmmaking process. There were, you know, a few days where I was like, I'm not sure I can get this done. But you kind of like, you know, don't like, this is where my process kind of kicked in. And like, you just kind of like, don't panic, just keep doing, keep working, keep solving problems. And out of that process kind of bloomed this performance that people really respond to. And that makes me so proud. Like, I get broken up when I talk about it sometimes, because it's like, you know, you being the audience saw something that I planned months before and worked really hard on to bring forward, and you're seeing it and it makes sense to you, and it moves you. And so that really makes me you know, I mean, it makes me proud, like on a deep, satisfactory, satisfying artistic level.
Yeah,
I don't mean to make, you know, I don't mean to make too much of it, but I'm very proud of the work. So I thank you very much for the kind words.
no, absolutely. The thing is, so, and I always remember this, is when they first announced that there was going to be a new Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and they kind of
Mhm.
dropped little teasers that they were bringing it, I guess, to kind of like modern society, because Texas Chainsaw's
Yeah,
always been a very rural, tucked away kind of set, and this is now like a brand new element. And I think a lot of
yeah,
people, there's always that little bit of worry before the movie comes out of how they're going to do it. And
right,
then the biggest worry is because we've seen so many different actors play Leatherface, and
yeah,
some have been brilliant. Obviously, Gunnar, to me personally, I love Andrew Bronowski's performances as well. But then there've been some that people maybe necessarily didn't quite enjoy. So that's always another worry for the fans. And
yeah,
I don't know what it was, but the way for me you told the story, the intensity you brought, um, and I think the costume was awesome as well. But I
mhm,
think your performance truly, I guess, made us capture the essence of a Texas Chainsaw Massacre in the modern times now, which to be honest, I wasn't sure if they were ever going to be able to do. Um,
yeah.
so for me, that I loved how they did it, and I loved how they shot it, and I loved the sets. Um, how do you feel personally if you watch back on it, on how they managed to bring such a classic franchise into a modern set and a modern kind of times?
Mhm. I mean, for me, the story works as a standalone film, and also as a kind of like
Yeah,
bringing the character and the franchise up to date, or at least maybe not up to date, but up to like the, you know, 2000, 2010, whatever it is.
yeah,
I'm not saying it's in the past, but I am saying like it's not really, you know, yesterday either.
yeah,
Um, so I think the film was written and conceptually evolved in a way that works. It's an engaging story. And so then, you know, like it was kind of communicated to me that I should focus on making the characters sympathetic in any way that I could. And that's a very touchy line, right? Because you don't want to be like sappy and sentimental,
yeah,
because then the audience will not only reject you, but they'll resent you as well. So I just, and then I'll, not the least of which my character is nonverbal. So how are you going to do that without, you know, lines to kind of convey something? But I feel like it had to do with the relationship my between Mrs. C, mother, and myself, and then counterposed against my reaction to the interlopers or the millennials who come in. So when you play those two things off of each other, then it becomes sympathetic, right? So it's not something that you so much have to like layer on with a big broad knife so that people get hit on the head with it. It's just kind of like you allow those two things to play off of each other and allow the audience to make up their own mind, and then they'll eventually, hopefully sometime within the 88 minutes, they'll be like, oh, those people are assholes and he is the good guy, kill them all, you know what I mean? So I mean, I didn't, that wasn't so much planned, but it was planned that that I wanted to make the character. I made a, I mean, I decided on a backstory that would help that scenario. So I made up, I made the decision that that any of the activity seen in the prior movies was forced upon him. In other words, that he did not partake of it willingly, that he was kind of goaded or taught this behavior, and when left alone would not uh, be this kind of chainsaw freak just roving and killing, right? That's what I decided. And that was kind of in the script, but most of it was not in the script. It's just something that I decided that I wanted to bring to the oh my God, are you kidding me? There's chainsaw in the background. I don't know if you can hear that. um Somebody's trimming some trees or something. I don't know. Anyway, uh and so I don't know, I've kind of lost track of where we are in the question now, but you know, I'm I put it in there purposefully, and I think that people see it and respond to it really like I'm super proud of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, like you said, there are elements where you do feel sorry for Leatherface. And one of my favorite scenes, and I guess it kind of touches on that being goaded, is I think the scene is so good as well. Is the scene where Leatherface first enters the bus, and
Yeah,
then he steps on, and all these like the millennials, the kids are all then staring at him, getting their phones out to film him and calling him a freak and insulting him. And that to me resonates with this is a, I guess a person is that gets pressured to the point where he kind of has to act out in that way.
right,
So I
right.
kind of get what you mean by where you feel like he's kind of being goaded and these decisions have been forced upon him. Um, but something I'd like to ask you about that bus scene is
Yeah.
how on earth was that filmed? Because to me, it just looked like it was just chaos and hectic in this tiny, compact space.
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, filmmaking wise, it's movie magic or whatever, right?
Hmm.
So, but that scene, that whole sequence was designed by Fady to be the most impressive sequence in horror history. So, and to do that, you have to like have a working bus. It has to drive. You have to gut it and make it into a party bus with a theme. And then you have to have a driver and whatnot. But then, so what gets done is the entire interior of the bus, including the ceiling, gets built in a studio. And they do that because then they can remove walls. So like, when I'm coming up the stairs into the bus and I'm starting the saw, the whole back of the bus isn't there. It's only what is viewed, by the camera. And that gives you, it's not so confined then. It looks like it's confined
Yeah.
and it's seamlessly put together by the craft of editing. Um, but that's how it was done.
Wow. That always, I mean, the whole movie, like I said, is it's a brilliant standalone, but there's something about that scene that always, it's always the first thing I think about when I think of that movie. I think it was so
Yeah.
brilliantly implemented. Um, and obviously with Leatherface, they kind of brought back the original chainsaw. So, how did you find working heavily with a chainsaw? And was it like, were there any challenges you faced having to work with one?
I mean, I grew up in the woods in Colorado before I moved to Arizona, and I was, cutting and splitting wood when I was 10 years old. Not, I mean, I wasn't the one using the saw, but
Mm.
I've always been around chainsaws. I know what they are and what they do. So I was very familiar with them prior to this movie. Um, so I didn't have any problem with it. It's heavy, but it's, you kind of get used to it and work with it. It is what it is. It's got to be in there for the story. So you kind of just, it's, just a tool, I guess.
Yeah. And I guess with the whole ensemble, the costume itself, which I love how they kind of crafted it together. What was your first opinion on the costume, and did you have any challenges working in it, or did it take quite a while to kind of put it all on? And how was all that for you?
Well, um, there's, you have to, like, I'm not saying the character thinks this way, right? Like, he doesn't know what I'm about to say. But there's really two characters. So you have the character of the person prior to the mother dying. And then you have the character and the person who is perpetrating the massacre after the mother is dead. And one of the things that I uh, meant so much to me uh, on the journey to making that character kind of more sympathetic to the people is to the audience members, um, is that scene that in other prior movies has been labeled the pretty woman scene. So in other movies, they have him wearing the dress, and what I chose to do was not wear the dress, but just like use the dress to remember my caregiver, my mother.
Yeah.
Um, so I believe that clothes to this character after the death of the mother are a bigger kind of like conduit of what he's feeling internally. Now, he doesn't know that, right? He's not making a decision to put on the tie and the church outfit because of anything other than he wants to change clothes from the previous stuff that he
Mhm.
was wearing. But I think he does it on a subconscious level for artistic, artistically exploitable reasons, if that makes sense. So I like the characters, the character's costume. I feel like it was functional prior to the death of Mother. He's just in overalls and kind of big boots and this and whatnot. And sorry,
No, you're right.
um, that's just like what he's been wearing since he arrived at the orphanage, really. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's just what he wears. And but after that, when he changes clothes into the church outfit with the tie and the slacks, or the apron, those are decisions that he makes that are on a subconscious level, and he's kind of like, all this time and all this, I'm sorry, I'm getting
Yeah,
text.
you're
Anyway, um all this time and all these years, he's kind of just been sitting in overalls and just kind of like chilling, right?
okay.
But then after the mother dies and he starts killing people, he kind of regresses into that other person that he remembers, um, and kind of like steps into it easily. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's cool to think
Yeah.
about it that way, actually. I never kind of thought of it in that way. So it'll be interesting actually when I rewatch it, I'll kind of think back to how he's kind of perceiving things. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so across your time filming, were there any particular challenges that you faced? Was there anything in particular you maybe struggled with a little bit, or maybe things that people would think, oh, that's not too, doesn't look too challenging, actually became quite a challenging task?
Yeah, for sure. So I told you my process is to watch what's being done, right?
Hmm.
And by doing that, I can know when it's time for me to work, whether I should go with what was being done prior or go against it as a kind of character element. But um, I got my job 4 or 5 days before the world shut down from COVID. And so COVID was the kind of like whatever, the 13th character in that movie, because it was so restrictive. Um, like I had 75 of those first generation nose tests
Oh,
like in 90 days, because we were shooting like COVID happened. I mean, the world shut down in March and we started shooting in August. So that's like 3 or 4 months there, not too much far removed. And then I couldn't watch other stuff that was being done in front of the camera so that I could help formulate my character, right? Because I was not allowed to be in that zone. So COVID, the way they handled COVID in the entertainment industry is they created zones of jobs. So if your job is putting the sets together and painting the sets, you have no cause or reason to be around the actors. So you were over there. And that's the only area that they could be. If you're a makeup person, you had to be fully masked, fully gloved. I, as an actor, had to have a face shield, but I couldn't wear a face shield like on my head because I had the mask and the other makeup on. So I had to have holding of kind of like clown thing, like, it was one of those plexiglass shields on a stick. It was ridiculous, but necessary. And
yeah.
we never tested positive. You know what I mean? We had 90,
Wow.
2.5 months of never testing positive. So it was, that's one thing that overshadowed the production that I feel like was an insane challenge, because it hindered me from doing what I would normally do that would make my job much easier. And
Mm.
instead I had to, here's the kind of like, what's the kind of kicker thing is, I had to trust what other people were saying. I had to trust uh the people who were kind of like adjusting me to, I had to process what adjustments they gave me into words and phrases that I can use to do what I want to do with the character and what they want to do with the character, and then kind of like bring that together in front of the camera. It was just, for me, it was an incredibly challenging process adjustment, but I feel like I made the adjustment and it worked, and people loved what we were doing on the days of, and people loved, somebody loved it enough to buy it at Netflix, and then now the people watching it, they love it and respond to what we did. So it kind of like all worked out in the end.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
mean that's the thing back, and it's very easy now to sit here with hindsight and to think about how things worked, but back then when you were actively working through that, you kind of never knew where this was all leading. So I have like when you kind of talk about having to work through those conditions, there's just a whole new level of like respect for it. So did you say you were on set for about 2.5 months?
Yeah, we were shooting for 2.5 months.
Wow. So you had 2.5 months of restrictions, COVID
I'm
shields.
telling you,
Wow.
90 days, like 75 tests in 90 days. I had, one every other day. And
Incredible.
yeah, I mean, it was, pretty amazing that we got it done without testing positive. Nobody tested positive. Mm, yeah.
That's phenomenal. So something I want to quickly move on to, which is definitely a big part of being in such a franchise and being such an iconic character, will now be the convention scene for yourself.
Mhm.
So now you're kind of a part of the Leatherface
Mhm.
community at the conventions, which I
Yeah,
can imagine is so high in demand because actors that play the top level iconic characters are sort of fans kind of travel across the world to get to meet. How did you
yeah.
kind of feel being, I guess, kind of pushed into that kind of new territory now of being a Leatherface actor now at a convention scene?
Well, I'll tell you, and it's kind of interesting because before this movie, like nobody really cared. You know what I mean? Like, but that doesn't mean that they weren't watching. And what I found out since I started doing conventions is that, all those years of TV in the 90s and all those years of independent films in the early teens, uh, people were watching, man. People were tracking, remembering me. And I'll tell you something, like being able to travel to different places and hear what those people say is like a drink of water that I didn't know I needed. So as an actor, you're just kind of driving around Los Angeles. This is how I characterize it. I was driving around Los Angeles for 25 years trying to get that job, right? And you don't really think or track, oh, I'm creating this thing that people are watching on the other side. I mean, you're doing it, but you don't think about it in those kind of terms. And so when somebody comes to my table and was like, "Oh my God, you were in Buffy. I remember you. Buffy saved my life, man." It's like, oh my God. It blows it it touches me in ways that I didn't I didn't know I needed to understand and hear. So I'm incredibly blessed to be traveling to the conventions. I love doing it. I love talking to fans. It's very important to me to give each person that comes to my table uh the experience that they want to have. Like what I mean by that is like engage with them in a kind of like truthful, heartfelt, you know, conversation about whatever they want to talk about. And I pride myself on that. I think it's like I said, I can only really describe it as, it's a drink of water I didn't know I needed. And it's it continues to be that.
Do you remember how you felt the very first convention you attended?
Yeah, I mean, I went to Texas Frightmare in May of 22, and I was just like blown away, man. Like there were so many people in this hotel. Like it was like being at a tiny little bar at the busiest time on Friday night when you kind of gotta shuffle your way across to get a drink and move your, your elbow your way back to get back to your table or whatever. It was like that. And it just like I had no idea it could be like that. And kind of what I learned now is that I mean, it's every weekend somewhere in this country, and I'm sure it's that way in Europe
Yeah.
or wherever. Every weekend, there's a gazillion people somewhere who bought a ticket to go see a bunch of other people at a horror convention. And I think it's great. I love it. I love attending. I wish I could go to every one.
Right now, as we're kind of talking, and right now where your career is, um, if you could have one role or maybe work in a particular genre or storyline, if you had a dream job and a dream choice, what would that be?
Oh man, that's such a wide open question. Like one of the things that comes to mind is I would love to play the universal monsters. I would love to do Frankenstein and Wolfman and whatever else. Like I think that would just be amazing. In a similar kind of movie, like a seriously taken, horror film. Like I think that would be amazing. I would dive into that like you wouldn't believe. Um, uh, Other than that, like I really um, relish the art of creating a character. So I don't think in those terms about genre or storyline
Hmm.
or this, that, and the other thing. I really like whatever someone wants me to do or whatever I win by audition. I'm gonna something we didn't really touch on is that the people who trained me after college, oh, here we go. Sorry. I live in a police neighborhood. Sorry.
No, no problem at all.
Um, the people who trained me after college, they're all A-list actors. They're all Oscar winners, Oscar nominees,
Wow.
Pulitzer Prize winning writers, Tony, Emmy winners and nominees. And so, um, like I put that kind of sensibility into all my work, no matter what it is. Doesn't matter if it's Leatherface or or something else that I would do. So and that's a high bar. You know what I mean? Like I remember just getting, not screamed at, but just like torn down. Not in a abusive kind of way, but just like to make the point of you have to answer these questions for yourself as an actor just to instill that kind of high bar of workmanship uh and I mean and now it's that process is solid.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so I guess one of the last two questions I have,
No
and
worries.
this is quite a wide open one, but I always ask every guest the same question because I feel it's always interesting to get the different pieces of, I guess, advice that people have. So if you could give people listening or watching some advice, it doesn't have to be about the industry, it could even be life advice. What would that advice be?
Well, the whole reason you're here talking to me is because I didn't quit. A I aimed high. Remember I told you I wasn't a student, right? So what are
Yeah.
my options? My options are extremely limited. And if I'm going to try and, do something that can set up the rest of my life, I had to aim high. Maybe a little too much information, but I'm a former foster child. So most of us are dead or in jail in this country. So there weren't a lot of expectations of my adult career or what I would do, and there weren't a lot of opportunities or options. So whatever I had to do, I was going to, have to make my own way. So I aimed high. And then once I delved into it, a desire to get better and never quitting, like that challenge of the self tapes. When all that reputation goes out the door, what are you going to do? You're going to give up? You're going to walk away from 10 or 15 years of effort trying to make something happen? Or are you going to figure out what you can do to overcome that hurdle? So don't give up and aim high at whatever you want to do. If you can think about it or dream it, or if you've had some, image in your mind or some, I use the word like begrudgingly obsessive thought about something that you wanted to do since you were a kid, like do it, man. Figure out what it takes to make it happen and go and be that thing. And because if you be that thing and you don't give up, eventually it's going to happen. I mean, it's just the nature of the world. If you keep at it and don't give up, something will turn your way eventually. And that's what I did. I did 7 years between the time that I decided to be an actor and when I got a job was 7 years. And my union card, 7 years. So, um, and there's all kinds of challenges. I know it's not easy, but if your desire is there, that will get you through the impetus to quit and just keep grinding, because eventually the world turns around and things will go your way. I don't mean to sound flippant about it. I truly believe it. And as I said at the beginning of this question, you're here talking to me because I didn't do those things. I aimed high and I didn't quit.
Mark, I truly want to thank you for taking time out of your day to speak to us. It has been such an amazing time to get to talk to you, and thank you for sharing everything about your life and your career and your all of the hard work you've put in. And you know, you know, you are a big reason as to why the Texas Chainsaw Massacre did as well as it did. And I hope you kind of know that your work is so appreciated by so many people.
I appreciate that, Samuel. Thank you very much. It means a lot to me. Absolutely.